Well, pick up your nets. We used to sing a chorus in Newfoundland, let down your nets. Let down your nets way down in the water. Remember that one, Winnie? Let down your nets way down in the water. There's a blessing there that you cannot contain. Yeah. I wonder about Peter. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. We talked about this a little bit on Good Friday. Can't imagine what was going through his mind. And he says, I'm going fishing. It's powerful. Thank God. Thank God for women preachers. Thank God for those women who went back with that story and that news. And they were persistent in telling it. The gospel says that no one believed them. Peter ran. Peter was fiery enough. He had to figure out what was going on for himself. I envision it took some convincing, and that's the scene that Colonel Gwen and I kind of put together for you this morning. I hope that was meaningful to you. This morning we continue on in our series. We finish our series, really. It's our last message in the series where we followed through Jesus' life, different parts, different times where he met in different rooms with different people, specific places, for specific reasons. Throughout the whole of Lent, we've done that. We've shared that together. We looked at the lessons that they learned together. We try to put ourselves in those spaces. We've been to the stable. We've been to the temple twice. We've been to the synagogue, to the Pharisee's home, Simon the Pharisee's home, and to Zacchaeus' home. And if you're here with us Good Friday, if you're able to be, or you gathered with us, it was a very different looking place here. And I hope that if you're here, it was significant to you as we tried our best to just enter into that upper room together and to be together. And to be there where the disciples were on that Thursday and into Friday. And here we have another space, another sacred space. And it's interesting because all the rest of them we talked about, all those other places we spoke about, were usually crowded. I mean, especially if you use Three's Company, Four's a crowd. If you use that, then all of them were crowded. But with maybe the exception of the stable, they really did have large crowds. All these different places we've talked about. Except for this one. This which is the pinnacle of every place in the Bible. There is no space in the Bible that is more important than the space we're talking about and we looked at already this morning. And it has no one in it. It's empty. And that's the hope of it. That tomb was empty. That the women got there on that Sunday morning, and it was empty. And they first couldn't grasp what was happening. They couldn't grasp what this signified. But it is the hope of the church that the tomb was empty, and Jesus Christ is risen. Amen? Amen. Jesus is risen. And we look at that room, that space. And eventually there is a little bit of a gathering. There's some women and an angel, or maybe more than one angel, or maybe Jesus. The Gospels are all a little bit different in their account. And there's a few reasons for that. One is they're all different writers that are all writing, really, a lot of them to different people. They have different intentions, different intended audiences, and different convictions. But also, they're trying to articulate, they're trying to share the most important news that anyone has ever shared before in all of human history. And so we see the gospel accounts of the resurrection all a little bit different. They're trying to point out different things, you see. But the main point, Jesus has risen. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? That is the story of Easter. That's the hope of Easter. But while it's the message of Easter, it's not my whole message this morning. That would be too easy on you. I need to keep you for a few more moments. We need to journey from that space, that holy space, that empty tomb that we celebrate this morning. And I want us to walk along the road towards that one of the last rooms that Luke talks about. There are a couple of more. We'll just look at the one in Emmaus this morning to close our time, to close this series. We'll follow along with these disciples. And they're leaving Jerusalem. After all these things have unfolded, they're disheartened, they're discouraged, they're disillusioned. Much as we imagine Peter to be, these disciples are. Even after the fact, even after Peter had gone there and there was no one there, they're trying to make sense of it, but they can't make sense of it. They're trying to believe the story of these ladies, that there were angels, that, the Lord had appeared in other Gospels. And yet they're trying to work this out, and they're so confused because it doesn't all unfold the way they expected it to all unfold. You see? And they're obviously not seeing clearly when Jesus comes by. We don't see things as clearly when we're upset, do we? If we're honest, we don't. They certainly didn't, these men. But some of us have been there. Some of us have been there where they were. Something had just happened that they wanted to go back and fix. I don't want it to have gone that way. I want things to be different, and I want to go back and fix it. I want to change the outcome. Have you been there? And they're downcast. And they're discussing all that happened. They're going over it in their minds. What could we have done differently? I wonder if they're asking these questions to themselves. What could we have done differently? What should he have done differently? They're replaying it all in their minds. And Jesus shows up. Says hi. And they say hi. And it's obvious that they're lost in their grief. Because the Bible kind of just says that Jesus kind of shows up and walks along. I mean, they're walking along the road to Emmaus. It's not like it's a freeway. It's not like there's a big crowd of people coming and Jesus slips out from them. The Bible has no mention of anyone else. Jesus just shows up and starts walking along. They don't even notice he's kind of come out of nowhere. They're like, oh, hello. Now, to their credit, the Bible does say, because they seem a little, I don't know what word I should use. That's nice. But the Bible does say in verse 16 that they're kept from recognizing him, to their credit. They're kept from recognizing him. They had to be kept from recognizing him. Because if they recognized him, who he was, there would have been mass confusion there on the road, wouldn't there? Wait, what? How? Who? What? I can't even imagine how it would have unfolded differently. But they should have known better, you see. That's part of the issue. This is very similar to some of the other things we've talked about throughout this series, this story. Peter should have known better. These disciples should have known better. Just like the Pharisees, like Simon the Pharisee in his home, should have known better because they had Moses and the prophets. Because what does Jesus go to when he's explaining to them who he is and what was supposed to happen? He doesn't go to some new source material. He doesn't bring up something new. He goes back, that book you have there, those scriptures you have there, I'm in it. And all these things are in it. And you haven't been getting it. And even now, Jesus is doing it. In verse 27, we see he uses Moses and the prophets. And they're hearing it again. I love the humor in the story. I referenced that when I was reading the text. These disciples were speaking to Jesus himself. And they were telling Jesus all about Jesus. Are you the only person that doesn't know these things? Well, what things? Obviously, Jesus knows all about them. So Jesus walks with them. He walks with them physically and figuratively. They thought they knew Jesus. They thought they knew him. They thought they knew Messiah. They proceed to tell Jesus about Jesus. It's really funny. I mean, it'd be like me looking at Mike and saying, Mike, I got this guy in my church named Mike. He comes to church, he plays in the band. Sometimes I point him out in front of the whole congregation, make him really, really uncomfortable. But it's really funny that they're talking to Jesus all about Jesus. Constantly. This whole way. And until Jesus finally speaks up. It's an amusing story. It's a humorous story. And yet it's an important story. Because it's not just silly. It's problematic. It's why God closes their eyes and tries to teach them the lesson. so they can learn it on their own, so they can come to grips with it on their own. Because in their thinking they knew Jesus, in their limited understanding of who he actually was, they come short of his glory, and they miss out on the purpose of their lives. And they're assuming they're missing out on truth. They've got the law and the prophets. Jesus shows them that's all you need to have known. Just like all the Pharisees, like Simon, that we talked about. They were just getting it wrong. And still here in our story, even after his death, even after his resurrection, he's still coming alongside people because he wants people to get it right. This is important stuff, and we need to get it right. Let's not make assumptions, friends. Please don't make assumptions, especially not about this stuff. Not about this stuff. It has eternal consequences. This has to do with why we're on the planet. Don't make assumptions about it and go on. Ask questions. And keep on reading. And keep on praying and keep on growing. It's too important just to coast. It's too important to be apathetic or presumptuous. We need to be learning and growing always. And be open to the leading of the Spirit and to what Jesus would say to us. And what God would say to us through his word at all times. We need to get it right. And that's why Jesus met these men on the road. They needed to get it right. And they needed to know it for themselves. And not just appear to them and say, I'm here, I'm alive, go tell people. They needed to know in their own hearts and minds. And this was true. This was planned. That this was God's intent. And so he closes their eyes. It's very similar to Paul's story, right? I don't know if the slides, some of my slides aren't working. There might be one up there, but I'm not sure, Steve. It's similar to Paul's story in Acts 9. Remember, Jesus shows up on the road as he's traveling and literally removes Paul's vision. Literally removes his sight. And the end result was to actually open Paul's eyes. That was the hope of it. Paul would regain his sight and finally actually see, not just physically, but spiritually as well. It's the same as when Jesus spoke to the Pharisees and to Simon, as we looked at in particular. You think you know. This story is very similar. It's in the same line of teaching. We need to know Christ and know him fully. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says, For now we see only a reflection in a mirror, and then we shall see face to face. Now this is a love chapter, right? It's talking about love, but God is love, right? And we'll see face to face. Now I know in part, and then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. We need to know him better. We need to know him more. One day we'll see him clearly, but for now, we must seek after him. We must strive to be like him and to know him and to make him known. Plenty of people in our world today know about Jesus. They even know his greatness. A few months back, I showed you survey results that a huge percentage of people knew about Jesus. They even believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. And yet they didn't believe in Jesus as Lord. This is what the survey results said. Now, for me, if I thought someone had risen from the dead, I think that's worth looking into. For me. But it's amazing how many people are apathetic. People that know about, but don't know. But we need to tell them. And we need to do so with an Easter sort of excitement. The church needs Easter excitement. The same excitement that the women had, or that these men had when their eyes were finally opened. You realize that they traveled 7 miles, about 12 kilometers there, and they have some bread, and they travel 12 miles straight back, 7 miles back, 12 kilometers back, a total of 24 kilometers. It's about half a marathon in that day. But they did it because they were excited, and people had to know this news. I've got to tell people this news. I've got to share it. We need to have that sort of excitement, Easter excitement, such that it will break through people's apathy about Christ, move them from knowing about him to knowing him, period. It's not enough just to know who he is, but also what it means, who he is, what that means. The famous British writer and historian H.G. Wells, he once said this. He said, "I'm an historian. I am not a believer, but I must confess, as a historian, that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is undeniably and permanently the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all of human history." Knowing about Jesus, truly knowing about him, should be enough to bring us not just to respect him, like H.G. Wells, but to have reverence for him, to worship him, as we started our service doing, and we are doing now, I hope. Worship him for who he is, for all that he is. He's so much. He's so many things to so many of us. This man who was born in a more humble and meager way than any of us. This man who lived consistently without and yet managed to give without measure. If you met him on the road, would you know him? If you did, what would you say? What would you ask him? How would you respond to him? By the way of his Spirit, he's even present now. Do you long to know him better? Do you wish to follow him more closely, to see him more clearly? Oh, that God would open our eyes, that God would continue to reveal himself through his word so we might know him more. So we might have the right answer when someone comes to us and says, "What things? What things?" What's all this commotion about this Jesus Christ? With all that said, and I want to coming to a close, but I think it's important. We haven't actually got to the room, so we've got to get there before I close. But it's interesting and important, and it's fitting in our series that even with all the outpouring of all this knowledge, even though Jesus is going through all the scriptures and explaining himself to them through the scriptures, and they have the best teacher that ever existed in Jesus, there's been no better teacher than Jesus himself. And even with that, despite all that teaching, it wasn't the teaching that opened their eyes to who Jesus was, but rather it was when he sat with them in that space and he broke the bread in that room. And there it is. That thing we've been looking at this whole time, that intimacy, that closeness. Fittingly, it's how they recognized him in that moment. In those shared moments, their eyes were opened to who he was. Jesus is wonderful. Jesus is wonderul. He joins them in their walk. This is the resurrected Lord of all the world, and he's walking along saying, "What things? Talk to me. Talk to me and tell me." Jesus is amazing. This is amazing. You might remember, last year we looked at another verse. It's in John 21. I'm away from my notes now. I think it's John 21. Yeah, there. Look, it's right on the screen. Thank you, Steve. But this is the resurrected Son of God, the conquering Son of God. And what does he do? He goes to the beach and he makes breakfast for his friends. That's the Lord I follow. And that's one of the reasons I follow him. Because that's the love he has for his people. That's the intimacy he longs for with every person. Not just to know about him, but to know him. To fully know him. And to make him fully known. Lord, help me. Lord, help me. Makes breakfast for his friends. Do you realize how much you're loved this morning? Truth is, no, you don't, because I don't know either. God is love, and he's beyond our understanding. His love for us, I can't articulate to you, no matter what words I use, no matter how hard I try. I just can't. No language can do it justice. But I love this. I love the last verse of this old song. Could we with ink the ocean fill? And were the skies of parchment made? Were every tree on earth a quill, and everyone a scribe by trade? Even still, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. That is the love of God for you, and the love of God for me, and it's displayed in his life, in his meeting in the room, and breaking the bread with all these different people, in his teaching with people, in his death on the cross, and in his resurrection. And even in these moments after his resurrection, where he meets with his people, how he does so shows his great love for you and for me. You are loved. What is your response to that love this morning? We can't close without noting that Jesus was going to walk on, or he makes it look like he's going to walk on. He wants to meet with those men in their home, but he doesn't go until he's invited. That's the story, and that's the Lord. He waits for the invitation. He has every right to barge on in. He's the risen Lord. He was there at creation. He's God in the flesh, and yet he waits for the invitation. What's your response this Easter morning? Maybe you want to come and pray that the Spirit would fill you with an Easter sort of excitement to go about God's work, to give you a renewal and a refreshing of your spirit. Maybe you want to pray that God would open your eyes, open your heart, to know him better still. Maybe your prayer is for God's resurrection power to be displayed in your life, or the life of a loved one or a friend this morning in some way. Maybe your prayer is just to accept him for the first time for who he is, Lord and Savior, and more. Whatever your prayer is, here on this Easter morning, at the end of our series about being in the room with Jesus, let's all just recognize that we are. We are. We're in the room with him. And let's respond to that as the Spirit may lead us. This place of prayer is open, and always is, if you want to come and pray here. But please pray. Please spend some time in prayer. We're going to sing beautiful chorus, beautiful song, really. That's so fitting for Easter. And I would say most, if not all of us, know it well. It's a song from the Gaithers. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future. Life is worth living because he lives. I'm not sure what everybody's facing in this room. I know some. I know bits and pieces. But I know that he lives, and I know that he loves, and I know that he's here this morning. And he calls us to respond. He's taking that step further and waiting. Will I get invited in to break bread with you? What's your response this morning? Let's sing this together.